thing. We'll be back with more cricket here on Sports Extra at 1:35, but it's high time we made our way to 5 Live Formula 1. Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, Practice 1, Imola. Ben Edwards, take it away, Ben.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yes, we're looking forward to the first practice getting underway at Imola and the first European Formula 1 event of the season so far. Great to be with you. Joining me, former F1 mechanic for McLaren is Mark Priestley and F1 correspondent for BBC Sport, Andrew Benson. Mark, it is always going to be an interesting one, this, because there are quite a lot of changes going on to the cars. You're an ex-mechanic from McLaren. Nowadays, of course, you do so much other stuff with driving cars all over the world. But it's fascinating when we see these modifications starting to come in a little bit at this stage of the season, and it might make a few changes, even though we probably expect McLaren still to be the dominant force.
Well, they've certainly been the dominant force so far, haven't they, up to this point? And pretty much on every type of circuit configuration, all sets of conditions, they have been the ones to beat. But that means that there's a target for everyone else to chase, and that's exactly what the other teams will be doing. The difference, I guess, this year is that we have got looming on the horizon an enormous change for the sport coming in 2026, both aerodynamic and chassis related, but also engine or power unit. One of the biggest changes we've had in history. So there's a lot of focus already at all of the teams on next year's car, which means we're going to get a limited number of upgrades on this year, throughout this year. But this is the first real big set of changes, I think, because it's so close to most of the teams' bases. A lot of the parts can come at the very last minute, literally being driven by road in vans, have been turning up over the last few days at the track. And it's going to be really interesting, particularly over these first two practice sessions, to just see what impact that makes and how quickly they can get on top of learning what the impact is.
Well, the weather's looking good. There's no risk of any rain today. There is a possibility on Sunday that we might get a bit of rain at Imola, but it's going to be a dry day. And Andrew, in a way it's good for them that they've got these two free practice sessions today on a day where there shouldn't be any rain, on a track which is quite a technical track, fast and flowing, lots of different kind of corners. It's a one that the drivers do enjoy, and it's quite a place for them to start experimenting with the cars a bit more.
Well, the interesting thing about this weekend, Ben, is that although McLaren have dominated the race results, they've won 5 out of 6 races so far this year, 4 of those for Oscar Piastri, which is why he's leading the championship. They've not been as dominant in qualifying as in the races, and at Imola and at Monaco next weekend, overtaking is really quite difficult. So if someone like Max Verstappen, for example, gets ahead of them in qualifying, which is definitely not impossible, he's done it before this year already, then it could be quite difficult for McLaren to win the race, especially because usually Imola is a one-stop. However, what I would say about that is that Pirelli have brought the very softest of their tyre range, and this year there's 6 options, and the what might have in the past been called an ultra soft or a hyper soft is called the rather less evocative C6 compound this year, and that's the very softest. It's normally only meant for street circuits like Monaco, Canada, for example, which are very unabrasive and generally have sort of short radius corners that are less demanding of the tyres. Imola has some really quite quick corners, but they've brought the C6 to Imola anyway, so that could mix things up. The idea is to try and mix things up and make it more stops, and of course the more stops there are, the more chance there is for a faster car in race trim to get ahead on strategy.
Yeah, that's going to be a major part of it. So Formula 1 in northern central Italy, about 20 miles southeast of Bologna, for this track, the Imola circuit, which is lovely to see it back. It's been a part of Formula 1 for many years. It first had a non-championship Grand Prix back in 1963 and 1979. Its first official World Championship race was in 1980. It was out of the pan for a little bit, but it's been back in it for the last few years. And Kimi Antonelli, who drives for Mercedes, is an Italian, so for him to be driving here this weekend, it's a big deal, particularly when he's been doing a really good job building up in his rookie career with Mercedes.
He's had a good start to this season. I don't think he's sort of set the world on fire just yet, but that's perfectly okay. We're only 6 races in, but he has been solid, and he had a sprint pole, of course, last time out in Miami. That felt like a real big step in this early part of his career. He's got unbelievable speed, which you get to see in those qualifying sessions, and he delivered on that occasion. So yes, there'll be some added pressure, but he doesn't strike me as the kind of person who really really succumbs to that. And actually, you know, we've got hundreds of thousands of Tifosi here. They're all wearing red, but it's Ferrari who are actually struggling at the moment. It may be that Kimi's the guy they all end up getting behind as this weekend unfolds.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's also interesting that the championship leader, and Oscar Piastri, Andrew, has also got Italian background, although it's quite a long way back, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, the interesting thing about Antonelli is that he's actually not just Italian. He's from about half an hour down the road.
Yes.
And I do know actually that Mercedes are a little bit concerned about the weight of that on the shoulders of an 18-year-old. I had some quiet conversations with their leadership some of the leadership figures at Mercedes about that in Miami last time out. So they're doing their very best to shelter him from that as much as they can. He has an old head on young shoulders. He's only 18, and I think just emphasises his youth. He brought his classmates from school to the paddock yesterday to show them around, to give them an idea of what he's been up to. He might not have set the world on fire, Mark, but I think his progress has been impressive. He went into this season trying to make sure that he didn't have any big accidents. And if you look at his quad, so he was taking things easy, not pushing to the edge too much, working his way into it. If you track his qualifying performances, 8, 6, 4, 3, 1, 3. He's been going up all the time, apart from between the sprint to Miami and actual Miami Grand Prix qualifying, which is a really good sign. And I think Miami was the first race weekend that he got into the car and felt confident to be able to push it that bit closer to the limit. And it was the first weekend, coincidentally or not, that he beat George Russell. So it's going to be interesting to watch his progress from now on.
It is, absolutely. Also, what you're hearing the cars out on track. They're just going out at the beginning of FP1, so this is very early stages. But what we're just also watching and listening to is Franco Colapinto. We saw some fans, the Argentinian, who is back in Formula One again, because Jack Doohan, who was driving this car for Alpine, has now been dropped away. They've said that Colapinto will be doing the next 5 races, for sure. Well, let's see. Maybe it'll be longer than that. And he has some good background here at Imola, so he's really excited. Even though he's from Argentina originally, he loves this track. He's done very well here in the past in other categories, so we're going to keep an eye on him, aren't we?
Yeah, it's one of those sort of difficult situations from a human perspective, because Jack Doohan is, you know, a little bit less extreme than the Liam Lawson situation we had at Red Bull at the start of the season, but he's not had very long to really show what he was able to do in this Formula One world. Franco Colapinto, we saw him have a really good debut, sort of unexpected at Williams, but he came in slightly differently there, where I would say there wasn't a dangling carrot of necessarily having a race drive at the end of that stint. He knew there wasn't a seat at Williams available for him. He was literally filling in for somebody. Here at Alpine, it's a little bit different. There is a different level of pressure. Yes, they talk about 5 races. I suspect he'll have way more than that if he does a decent job. But the reality is that if he does do a pretty solid job, there is a race seat available. It's there for the taking, and that just changes the level of pressure that's on his shoulders.
We're listening to Lewis Hamilton out on track at the moment. But Andrew, it is interesting that Franco Colapinto's got this opportunity. You're listening to the Ferrari power now as Lewis Hamilton, of course, a man who knows this track extremely well, as do so many of the drivers. Lewis, 1 pole, 1 win here in the past, couple of podiums, but he was out-qualified by his Mercedes teammate last year, George Russell. We'll see how he gets on in a Ferrari in Italy for the first time he's raced a Ferrari in Italy. There'll be a lot of support for him, of course. But yeah, just coming back quickly to Colapinto, his background and the fact that he's taken over from Jack Doohan, we've got to watch to see how he gets on.
So it's a decision really that's not been based on purely on performance. Jack Doohan had a solid start to his season, I think. 6 races. He's had 2 big crashes, which definitely didn't help his cause. One in the wet in Australia in the first Grand Prix of the year, and then one in practice in Japan where he left the DRS open going into the first corner on his second flying lap of practice, which was quite a bad mistake really, even though there were extenuating circumstances. But he hadn't embarrassed himself by any stretch of the imagination. I think everybody in Formula One was well aware that the minute Alpine signed Franco Colapinto over the winter from Williams, it was only a matter of time before he got in that race seat, basically because he comes with the hope of, and at least for the moment, some Latin American sponsorship money. his entry into Formula 1 last year created a lot of excitement in Argentina, which is a native country, and the Flavio Briatore and Alpine are hoping to tap into that. They've already got some Latin American sponsorship as a result of Colapinto, and I think whether it's fair on Jack Doohan or not, unless Colapinto has a really rough time over these next 5 races, I suspect he's going to be in the car, as Mark says, for a fair bit longer, perhaps probably for the rest of the season. A bit of a mix-up on track there between one of the prizes was like Charles Leclerc and Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin. Here's Alonso's radio.
I need to crash with Leclerc.
Yeah, I don't think Alonso was very impressed by that, not looking in his mirrors or not being told that he was coming.
He got an apology though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc just put his hand up to apologise and say, "Oh, sorry, didn't realise you were there." Alonso backed right off. Yeah.
The thing about Colapinto was that he made a strong first impression when he got into Formula 1 last year, when Williams dropped Logan Sargent after the Dutch Grand Prix. But I'm not sure people were looking as closely at him as they might have done. So he out-qualified Alex Albon in his second race. But there were situations there where Albon didn't get his second lap in qualifying. So it wasn't a fair comparison. And then Albon basically was quicker than him. And then Colapinto had 3 big accidents, 2 of them in one weekend in Brazil, and another one in Las Vegas. I think the question is, can he be quick and not crash at the same time? We haven't got an answer to that, because he was not like, he came in and I think people were impressed, but it was almost that they were impressed because he did better than they expected, because he hadn't been doing that well in Formula 2 at the time. And I think whether holistically, if you looked at his 9 races for Williams last year, you wouldn't have necessarily said that he was going to be, break into Formula 1 and be a megastar.
I think one of the things that did impress me though was his qualifying pace against Albon, because we know Albon is very, very quick. And in the 8 dry qualifying sessions, I was looking it up. The average of difference between them is 0.02 of a second. It was the wet qualifying in Brazil. He was way off Albon, but everywhere else it worked out at 0.02 difference from Albon. I was impressed by that.
That is good. And so what he's got a chance to do now in these next 5 races is to prove whether he, whether he can reach that consistent level consistently enough. He's got his big chance. While we're on Aston Martin, by the way, I just mentioned they've got a big upgrade on that car this weekend, but today only Lance Stroll has it. Fernando Alonso is running the old spec car, so they can do a back-to-back. Personally, if I'd been running the team, I'd have the drivers the other way around, but there you go. Dad owns the team, so there you go.
So early days of free practice 1. Let me just tell you, Yuki Tsunoda has just set the pace. Quite a few of them are running this new soft tyre, this C6 Pirelli tyre. Quite a lot of them are doing laps on that. So Tsunoda has set the pace initially. Lewis Hamilton has just gone second fastest. He was quick a moment ago, dropped down a little bit with a few other people. Antonelli, although Alonso now, it is all still changing. Alonso's just gone even quicker. So let's just have a little bit of a replay. We're listening into Gabriel Bortoletto here in the Sauber radio.
Check at the right height. I'm bottoming so much in the straight. It's like crazy. I cannot even keep the head straight.
Okay, copy that, Gabby.
Mark, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the right height and on a track where you do need to clip the curbs a little bit here at Imola to get it right, but if it's bouncing too much onto the ground, that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, this is what the practice sessions are for. It's about gauging that. It shouldn't be bottoming just down the straight. The curbs you mentioned, actually the curbs here are really quite aggressive, really quite high, and with the modern era of Formula 1 cars, these ground effect cars, because they tend to run so stiff and so low to the ground, that actually the curbs can really be a problem at times, put the car both mechanically but also the tyres under quite a lot of stress. So it's something that these practice sessions are there to figure out. They'll be finding out exactly how much they can use the curbs. They've got to figure out things like the ride heights, but yeah, that's something that shouldn't be happening at this point. They should have at least a baseline setup, including ride height, which should avoid bottoming just down the straights.
You're listening on board with Franco Colapinto now. So the Argentinian that we've been talking about back into Formula 1 this weekend for his first race of this 2025 season, and with history of winning in Formula 2 here last year, it is a track that he certainly is looking forward to. and we shall see how it works out for him. He had a win here in Imola as well, funnily enough, in Formula 3 days, so he's got great history.
Yeah, and it definitely makes it a little tiny bit easier to come in and make your debut on a track that you're very familiar with. It's just another element you don't have to learn. He's got to learn a lot of systems on board that car, from the steering wheel. Of course, he spent time in the simulator, but he's got to learn how the engineering teams work inside the garage, how a race weekend works. He's been the reserve driver, of course, at this team for some time, so he's been in and around the garage, but it's a whole different ball game when you're actually the guy behind the steering wheel, figuring out how to do these things, when to operate the various systems and which tools you have available to you. So learning the track on a circuit that you didn't know would be just another element, so that's one thing in his favour.
He's just gone 12 quickest, pushed down to 13th. Actually, interestingly enough, as Gasly, his teammate's just gone fastest. They're both on the medium tyre. Now, that's quite intriguing, because Gasly's just on a time... he's just gone second now, but he was briefly fastest. George Russell just going quickest now and going across the line with a very good final sector. But yeah, Gasly on the medium compound. Interesting that he's gone so quick. No great surprise. Lando Norris goes even faster. Does a 1:17.491.
I think what you're going to find is, because people are on this C6, which is the softest tyre we have this season, it's the first time everybody's run it, so that's why everyone's on it right now. They've got to get a reading on it. No one chose to run this in pre-season testing, so it is the first opportunity to try it. But because it's so soft, you're going to get more and more rubber down on the racetrack as this session unfolds, which means the grip level increases, the lap times will therefore decrease. So I suspect it's going to be one of those sessions, but it may be even one of those weekends where the track just continues to get quicker and quicker and quicker the more of this rubber that we start laying down.
I wonder if we'll actually see the soft tyre in use at all in the race. I think it'll obviously be a big part of qualifying tomorrow, but in the race last year, when they were actually the next level up in terms of softness of tyres, the soft tyre only did about 7 or 8 laps. A few people started on the soft tyre, but they could only do 7 or 8 laps before they had to make a pit stop. So I wonder, how many laps you're going to be able to do on an even softer tyre.
And it's going to mean, because the range has moved up one step, if you like, it's going to mean what was last year's soft tyre will have to be a race tyre this year. It's now that tyre is effectively now the medium.
Yeah.
So this is, as Andrew touched on earlier on, this is why Pirelli have done it. They're trying to encourage more of a two-stop type race strategy. I still think it's going to be favouring a one-stopper. I think we'll spend a very short period on the C5, which is the medium tyre, and then we'll move on to the harder tyre for the remainder of the race. But I think there's a couple of factors. Degradation tends to be quite low here. It's not a particularly abrasive racetrack. It is very difficult to overtake, so if you're going to make multiple stops, you've got to be able to fight your way back through the track. And the pit lane is the longest of the entire season, which means that the pit lane lost time is around 28-29 seconds, so making extra pit stops is rarely ever preferable.
Yeah, one thing you can be sure of is that the teams will be doing their utmost to make it a one-stop race because of those reasons that you mentioned, Mark. The other thing is that the tyres this year, after about 14 years of being asked to make them more durable and more pushy, if you like, so the drivers can push harder on them, as we're hearing Leclerc pushing hard over the curbs at the Variante Alta chicane, they have actually succeeded in doing that this year. So it's kind of ironic that they're trying to promote two-stop races, but they've actually produced a tyre that sort of works against that.
Yeah,
Go on, carry on, Ben, sorry.
No, it's a good point, though. And if it is just a one-stop race, as you both say, because of that long pit lane, then qualifying will be as important as ever. So we were just watching Leclerc, as you say, use the curbs at Variante Alta, but before that, we'd just seen a little highlight of him running wide into the gravel, and he's been off there in the past in one of the races here not long ago. So Hamilton's just going quick in the other Ferrari, though. He's set the fastest middle sector, and he's pushing on. Lando Norris is currently fastest by a fraction from George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. So it's a top 3 British lineup at the moment as they are over the line. So it's Norris, Russell, Hamilton, top 3 Brits, and then Alonso 4th, surprisingly, Leclerc 5th. Lance Stroll is currently 6th in the modified Aston Martin, as you were telling us, Andrew. He's got the modified parts. A lot of the cars are modified, though, for this weekend. Antonelli is currently 7th. Isaac Hadjar is in 8th place. Oscar Piastri, the championship leader, currently down in 9th. And 10th place at this stage is Pierre Gasly. No time yet for Carlos Sainz. He's the only one who hasn't set a time in the Williams. Sometimes they'll wait a little bit before sending them out, but I would have thought they'd want to get him out fairly quickly, wouldn't they?
Well, I think if for no other reason to sort of shake down the car, but also to get a read on these C6, these very soft tyres. So I'm sure we'll see him out at some point, unless there is some kind of problem we haven't seen yet. Verstappen all the way down in 16th at the moment, but I think what we tend to find, it's been a trend over the last few years, is that Red Bull, even once they do get up to speed on a Friday, they tend to run their power units in a much lower setting on the Friday than they do when it comes to qualifying. When it comes to qualifying and you enter Parc Fermé, you have to set your power unit on the power mode that you're going to then continue running for the race. So you can't switch between qualifying and race, but in practice you can run it effectively however you like. So to save a little bit of longevity perhaps with their power unit, they tend to run it at slightly lower settings, as opposed to the likes of McLaren, who tend to run it at a higher setting in the practice sessions, which is often why we see Red Bull closing the gap between Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, Mark, because that's actually generating, there's already plenty of tension between McLaren and Red Bull on a whole bunch of different levels. Christian Horner and Zach Brown hate each other for a start. But here's Leclerc's radio.
I've got so much lift at the point to turn 1. Is it a quick one to put a little shield or whatever?
Yes.
He's talking about helmet lift, isn't he? Aerodynamic lift. They want to put a little windshield, if you like, on the front of the cockpit, which he doesn't have at the moment. So that's what that refers to.
Yeah, so just to go back to McLaren and Red Bull. So this thing, the different performance patterns between Friday and Saturday, it's actually becoming a thing for McLaren, because they think that Red Bull sort of, or at least people, not blaming Red Bull, but they think people are misinterpreting Friday, putting too much emphasis on what the times are on Friday. They say that when we look at the times and extrapolate what we know about how Red Bull run their car, we always think they're competitive on Friday, even though they don't look it. And they think that there's too much is made of Red Bull making incredible progress between Friday and Saturday. And they've found an incredible setup. They've worked so hard on it. And look, suddenly Verstappen's in the battle for pole, and hasn't he done a great job to be so? For McLaren, their point of view is, well, they always look competitive to us. It's just that they weren't running their engine up at the same level as us, or they were doing this differently or that differently. So there's a little bit of needle that they think that people are overplaying how bad the Red Bull car is, when they think it's, at least in Verstappen's hands, they think it's always competitive, pretty much, basically.
That does make a point. No, it's a very good point, that, Andrew. And so we're not going to be too concerned at the moment that the Red Bulls are quite a long way down the list. Verstappen's been pushed down to 18th. He is still in the pits at the moment. Tsunoda's on an outlap now, so we'll get a bit more of an indication. Meanwhile, the Racing Bulls cars are out there, and Isaac Hadjar is putting together a pretty good lap, but Lando Norris has just gone 0.4 of a second faster than anyone else, although it's Bortoletto, surprisingly, who is currently second fastest. That's impressive, but this will all change, of course.
Yeah, these times are not to be taken too seriously at the moment, with Gabriel Bortoletto Sauber second. What I would say about the Red Bull, having said that, is that I know that internally within the Red Bull group, there is a bit of a conversation going at the moment as to whether they think their car might actually be no better than the Racing Bull. Because if you look at the driver comparison between, for example, Tsunoda and Lawson swapping cars, where's Tsunoda been qualifying the Red Bull compared to Isaac Hadjar, for example, whereas Lawson qualifying the Racing Bull, having gone back to Racing Bulls from Red Bull, they think that that is where the level of the Red Bull is. The cars are probably not that different in performance, but Verstappen is making the difference in the Red Bull car compared to the other drivers in the Red Bull family. Of course, what you can't know is how fast would, for example, Norris or Piastri or Russell or Leclerc or Hamilton be in a Red Bull compared to, that's always the imponderable, what the difference the driver is actually making, even if everybody thinks Verstappen is probably the best driver in F1 at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. point. Just saw a nice slow-mo of Franco Colapinto going over the curbs, and the way that the front wings flex, and of course that is going to change a little bit in a few races, but it's fascinating watching them around here.
It's a fascinating topic, this, the whole flexi-wing saga, and there is a sort of technical directive coming in a couple of weeks' time in Spain, which will effectively mean that the tests for those wing flexing becomes a little bit more stringent. We don't know yet how much that's going to affect everybody. You know, there is talk on the Red Bull side of the argument that maybe it'll start hampering McLaren, because they seem to think that there's been a lot of flex on the McLaren. McLaren say their wing is already Spain compliant, so they don't think they need to do too much. So that's all, you know, something of interest over the next couple of races. But the reality is, everything has to flex at all times. These materials, if they were utterly rigid, they would literally break every time you went over a curve. So you never can get rid of flex. It's about trying to limit the amounts of flex available. The team's perspective on that is they want as much flex as possible, because they can utilise that to minimise drag on the bits where they don't need downforce, and have it flex back to increase downforce through the corner bits where they really need it most. So it's just a constant game between the teams and the rule makers, always going backwards and forwards, and the next step of that comes in a couple of races' time.
Absolutely. George Russell going very quick at the moment. He's just done fastest first and second sectors, and he's been showing good pace already. I think we're going to see a fastest lap. Yes, 1:16.5, and he's run the soft tyres. That was impressive. Just watching him was impressive, the way he was going to the very edge everywhere, but he had it beautifully under control. It's looking quite strong today.
Yeah, it was a good clean lap from George Russell. That George Russell has been a bit of a sort of unsung hero so far this season. Always there or thereabouts.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a car that clearly isn't, always a match for the McLaren. Certainly not in race trim, but actually in qualifying, he's often been able to put himself in a good spot on the grid, and he's just gathering up the points in the hope that perhaps Mercedes can bring some parts of that car and close the gap later in the season. But in the early phases of this championship, he's doing everything he can to stay at least in touching distance.
It's also interesting that he's done 6 laps on those soft tyres. Obviously that'll be fast lap, slow lap, fast lap, slow lap, fast lap, but they're lasting reasonably well with that cool down phase in between.
That's impressive.
Yeah, one of the things I find quite ironic about this whole flexi wing debate, and Red Bull working away in the background to accuse McLaren of exploiting it more than them, is that those of us with slightly longer memories can remember that it was actually Red Bull that in historical terms were the ones who had the most accusations about using flexible bodywork levelled against them. So it's somewhat ironic that they find themselves on the other side of the coin now. But anyway,
we're listening to Max Verstappen, so he's on to a lap now on a set of softs himself. He's not going quite as quick in the sectors as George Russell, but he's putting together a reasonable lap. So let's just see how this goes. Yeah, that's all right. Actually, it was just a bit noisy. The noise caught me out a little bit, but all fine. And he goes 10th fastest at this stage. So Russell still very much on top, and Verstappen down in 10th, 1.1 seconds behind on the same tyre. Alex Albon's just done a good lap in the Williams. He's gone 3rd fastest, so it's currently George Russell, Lando Norris, Alex Albon. Yuki Tsunoda in the other Red Bull has gone 4th fastest, so it just goes to show it's impressive. Antonelli is on a pretty good lap, and Pierre Gasly also doing a good job. Early days still of first practice, so it's just everybody getting a feel for the car, especially with the changes that have been made for this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of evaluation happening across lots of fronts here. It's exactly what practice is for, of course. Antonelli pops in 3rd, so that's Russell first, Gasly 3 tenths behind him, and then another couple of tenths back, half a second back to Antonelli from his teammate. So Mercedes in decent shape so far, but there's a lot of evaluation going on, because there's a lot of new parts, new components on a lot of these cars up and down the grid. We talked about it earlier on. It's the first European race, really quite close to most of the factories. These sort of readily available parts are coming thick and fast, and they will continue to come in many cases over the weekend, because they can be literally driven by road here at the last minute. So there's that being evaluated. There's a lot of aero rakes, pressure sensor arrays all over these cars to measure exactly what those components are doing, to sort of just to I guess compare the data from the real track situation to what they have in the virtual world back at base and from their wind tunnels. There's of course also the evaluation of these brand new tyres, and it's a circuit as well that, as we said earlier on, doesn't really degrade the tyres very much. So as Andrew said, 6 laps on a super soft tyre in the hands of George Russell, and he's able to put the fastest lap in. So lots of learning happening for us, but especially for the teams.
But interestingly, Gasly is 2nd fastest on the medium compound again, so that surprises me a little bit, because because you would think that super soft tyre you're talking about would be worth a fair bit of time, but Gasly is putting in some very quick laps, and that's impressive. Colapinto, his teammates, down in 10th place currently. We're watching Ollie Behrman, who is slowest of all at this stage. He's also on the medium compound tyre. But remember, this is free practice. They may well be using different amounts of fuel, different weights on the cars, not necessarily going for their fastest pace just yet. Hamilton, who was very quick at one point, he's down in 14th place now. Leclerc in the other Ferrari down in 17th. He's only just coming back out on circuit. So everybody's still building up the pace at this stage as we keep an eye on Ollie Behrman, who is having a good season. Yes, it's not all been perfect. Sometimes the qualifying hasn't quite gone for Behrman as well as he would have liked. But here in Formula 2, he's had some reasonable results. He finished 5th here in 2024. The second race didn't work out so well for him, despite starting from 3rd place on the grid. But he is another one of the rookies to watch this year, because he can deliver some pretty impressive results.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few rookies to watch this year, and they're still coming, with more of them adding. Colapinto making his debut for this season, at least, this particular round. So, yeah, lots of new talent on the grid. I think a lot of it is really quite exciting. Behrman definitely one of those. We've seen what he was able to do in a Ferrari when he very first was dropped in, sort of parachuted in as a stand-in driver. So we know he's got talent. We know he's got the ability to drive these cars. It's now about trying to figure out the team that he's in and the technology he's got underneath him, and figuring out, because they're so nuanced, these cars now, and we're seeing it across different racetracks and in different temperature zones and environments. The swing of performance up and down the grid is quite significant. So on one weekend you'll have, an enormous gap for McLaren out in front because the temperatures are high. On another weekend, Japan, for example, it was actually the Red Bull who looked like he, did a blistering job, did a really good job. Leclerc almost went off again at that same final corner, just managed to keep it out the gravel. So I think there's a lot to learn for young rookies, and what we're seeing, the trend now, seemingly, is that you don't get very long to learn that. Lawson 2 races, Jack Doohan just 6 races.
I know.
The pressure's on to learn very, very fast, and I think this is one of the most difficult eras to learn these cars in a quick space of time. Interestingly, Fernando Alonso came out yesterday and almost countered that argument, saying, well, when he came into the sport, there was no such thing as the sort of simulators and the old cars that you're able to run around in these days. All the preparation that young drivers have now, his view was, we should be pretty well prepared.
That was interesting. I wasn't sure I totally agreed with that, Andrew, because in those days you were able to do more testing in the cars when Fernando first joined.
Well, what he talked about was his very first season, and he said he had a seat fit a week before the first race, which
with Minardi had very little money at that time.
And at that point, the team was bankrupt, and they thought they weren't going to go to the first race. And here's Leclerc's radio again.
Helmet lift is horrible.
He's still struggling, Leclerc, obviously, with that helmet problem. And so he went to his first Grand Prix with Minardi. Paul Stoddart bought the team in the intervening gap, and they didn't go bankrupt, obviously. And he went there with no testing, basically. And there was another story he told once that I heard him talk about, was when he nearly crashed in the pit lane at his first Grand Prix because he was trying to work out the steering wheel controls still as he was going down the pit lane, and didn't notice that someone had stopped in front of him and nearly rear-ended another car. So I think in Fernando Alonso's case, he definitely didn't get into Formula 1 with very much preparation and testing. On the other hand, Lewis Hamilton, by contrast, did. When he came in 2007, he's had something like 5,000 kilometres of testing in the previous winter, which is way more than drivers get these days because of the limitations on testing. So it's very much an individual thing that's specific to each driver's own experience as to whether they have more or less testing. But what I would say, as a general overall observation, that the older drivers, Max Verstappen's just gone second in the Red Bull, the older drivers these days, they do feel generally that the younger drivers coming in now have more facility to be better prepared than they did because of all the things like TPC days, which is running old cars, the quality of simulation now, which means that you can get into it, you can go to a racetrack and you don't have to learn it anymore. All these extra tools that the young drivers have these days, they feel it does help them be more prepared than they were 20 years ago.
Don't we all think like that, though? It's way easier back in the day, because I think exactly the same about the mechanics in the pit lane now. They got curfews, they got summer breaks. We didn't have any of that.
No, you used to work all night sometimes, didn't you, when you were mechanicking? Not allowed to do that anymore. So let's just quickly run through, because we're nearly halfway through FP1. We've just got a little bit more, but let's just run through the order as it stands right now. It's George Russell who has set the pace. Carlos Sainz has just gone second quickest in the Williams, but Verstappen, as you mentioned there, Andrew, he's done a good lap. He's now up to third. Pierre Gasly in fourth place. Let's listen to Leclerc's radio.
The street is just too small. Doesn't know a difference. It's like less than a mil.
Okay, so we'll add a bigger one.
Yeah, Charles still not happy about the way that the airflow coming over the car to his helmet is not working for him. They're still working on that. So Antonelli is currently fifth fastest. Sixth is Lando Norris. We're just having a little replay of Lewis Hamilton. He was on a warm-up lap by the looks of things, but he had to straighten out the outer chicane, even though it didn't look as though he was on a mega lap then, was he?
No, I didn't see the lap he was on, but yeah, still not entirely comfortable. Actually, both of those two Ferrari drivers still not entirely happy yet. Leclerc we've seen pushing and stepping over those limits. Lewis finding the same sort of trouble. A little bit interesting there that Lewis doesn't have one of those little aero screens on the front of the car. He's not suffering with that same helmet buffeting, which is the aero coming off the car, but it shows you the sort of differences, the small differences in terms of their seating position, maybe their helmet design. The rest of the car, of course, is pretty much identical. So the aero coming off the front of the cockpit and affecting Charles Leclerc's helmet is clearly different to that of Lewis Hamilton. The solution, as you heard Charles Leclerc talking about on the radio there, this little aero screen, almost like a windscreen that they stick around the front of the cockpit. They'll have a variety of different sizes of those. They've put what they think is the smallest one on Charles Leclerc's car right now because it's detrimental to the overall aerodynamic performance of the car generally. So now they'll take the next step up, I guess, make a slightly larger one and see if that alleviates the problem.
It's probably because they're sitting at very slightly different heights.
That's what I mean. Their seating position and helmet design makes such a big difference.
So I think Leclerc does look in the car like he sits slightly higher than Hamilton. What's strange about it, though, is that you wouldn't think that this is race 7, right? Why is it suddenly a problem? I don't know what might have changed on the Ferrari to make it a problem for Leclerc today.
They have brought some upgrades, but as far as I know, nothing major at the front end. Am I right in thinking that? I think it's just at the rear end they've bought bits and bobs.
I'll check for you, Mark.
Yeah, go on, have a look at your list.
Let's just quickly go through that full order then. So it's Russell, Sainz, Verstappen third, Gasly fourth, Antonelli fifth, Lando Norris is currently sixth, Alex Albon is seventh, Yuki Tsunoda eighth, Gabriel Bortoletto is ninth, Lance Stroll is 10th, Franco Colapinto back in F1. Well, he's just been pushed down to 12th. Alonso's just got up to 8th. Colapinto down in 12th place behind Stroll. Then Piastri, who is out on circuit now, he's down in 13th place. He could be putting together a better lap. Hamilton is 14th. Isaac Hadjar is 15th. Ollie Behrman 16th. Liam Lawson 17th. Charles Leclerc all the way down in 18th place. Esteban Ocon down in 19th. And Nico Hulkenberg is currently slowest, but he's also on an out lap.
Yeah, so to answer the Ferrari question, it's all at the rear, Mark. You're absolutely right. Rear corner, rear wing and beam wing. So Ferrari are not one of the teams with the biggest amount of upgrades. The biggest one is Aston Martin, which is why I mentioned it earlier in the commentary. But most of the teams have got something. Mercedes, even McLaren, who they're only small things. A lot of them are circuit specific. But even McLaren have got things for Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. Again, nothing major on the Red Bull. And Max Verstappen yesterday was saying he didn't expect it to close the gap to McLaren this weekend, and it wasn't very significant. You're absolutely right, Ben, about Piastri. Do you want to tell us about that? Now he's just at purple sector in the middle sector. Who else has got upgrades? Alpine as well, and Haas. The only team that don't have one really are Williams.
Okay, well, we're watching Piastri right now, as you say, because he's just set the fastest middle sector. Can he beat George Russell's fastest pace that we've seen? Yes, he can. He only by a fraction, 0.054, but he is still on the soft tyres, which presumably have done a few laps already. So he goes fastest now. So it's a Mercedes in second place to the McLaren. And yeah, you're just working out
9 laps.
9 laps. Okay, thank you. So I'm impressed at these super softs. So we're calling them super softs. They're C6 Pirelli tyres, but effectively a super soft tyre. They're actually sticking out quite well. We're riding on board a replay of George Russell. Listen in.
Lots of bottom end tank wear from Kimi. Exit turn 4, entry turn 5.
So that was interesting. He's following his teammate and he's just reporting back what he's seeing from the car in front, which is always useful, of course, for the team. Interesting that he's making those observations, and I'm imagining that if he's reporting that to the team, he's not feeling the same sort of thing. So he's just picking out a difference, I guess, between his car and his teammates, which is of use to the team back in the garage.
It's also important because it's not, earlier this year Hamilton was disqualified for floor wear. I think it was Hamilton anyway, or was it Leclerc, one of the Ferrari drivers in China? Maybe both of them actually. They were both disqualified.
Leclerc was underweight, Lewis was floor wear.
Thank you, yeah. And indeed Mercedes have fallen foul of that themselves as well previously in Austin, so it's a really big thing with these ground effect cars. So Russell's basically saying watch out for that floor wear because we can't run the car this slow, we're going to get into trouble.
Lando Norris on track at the moment on the soft tyres. He's pushing hard. I was surprised actually. His turn in to the Villeneuve chicane was really quite vicious. Lando's usually a very smooth driver, although his first sector wasn't as quick as he's done already. His middle sector is a personal best, and we're still keeping an eye on him. I love the ups and downs of this Imola circuit. There is, that gives that little bit of extra ability for the driver just to sort the braking, get these curves right, but the ups and downs are all fun part of it.
Yeah, it's a real old school circuit, and we should point out to listeners that this actually could be the very last time we come here. It's the last year of the current contract for Imola, and highly unlikely it will be renewed.
I've got a tear off, I think, on my rear wing flap.
Okay, Nico, copy that.
Nico Hulkenberg just reporting an issue there, having gone out for a decent lap, and he's got 7th fastest, and surprisingly but two Saubers are 6th and 7th. Bortoletto 6th, Hulkenberg in 7th place at the moment. A team that's really struggled all this year. Is this going to be a track where they're suddenly a bit stronger, or is this just free practice one that shows us nothing about what we'll see in qualifying?
Yeah, I think unfortunately that.
Okay.
I mean, there is, as I said, performance does swing between circuits. We're definitely seeing that in the modern era of Formula 1, but in FP1, particularly this early on, every team will have a slightly different run plan. They're trying to learn different things. As Andrew said, many of them have got new components on the car, so their run plan will be focused around learning how those components affect the car, what setup changes they can make to optimize those components. It's not really all about just going out and topping the lap time sheets. Effectively to the teams, that's irrelevant at this point. So we get some indication, particularly as we move through into FP2 a bit later on. We start getting real out-and-out qualifying runs and then race runs happening as well. That will give us a much clearer indication of the overall pecking order.
Gasly just going 3rd fastest there. Listen to Hamilton.
The car doesn't want to stop.
Braking has been an issue, hasn't it, for Lewis Hamilton with the Ferrari this year?
Yeah, it has, and we saw an incident that you pointed out a moment ago where he couldn't get it stopped at the chicane and actually cut across the chicane. So yeah, braking definitely an issue. It's something they've got to get on top of, because it's one of the major factors, of course, when it comes to lap time. The drivers have to have absolute confidence that they can leap on those brakes at the very last minute, and they know the car is going to do exactly what they hope it's going to do, consistently every single time. As soon as you introduce a little bit of inconsistency, or you don't believe that it's going to stop when you want it to, then you start braking a little bit earlier, and that obviously compromises your lap time.
When you were a mechanic for McLaren, presumably the drivers dealing with braking is one of the key things that really matters to them, and how the team works on the braking, making sure it's always at its best. That is a big key aspect, isn't it?
It's huge. You know, you sort of imagine the acceleration and the power is the thing that generates lap time, but actually braking is a huge part of that. Some drivers are more sort of fussy about it than others. I remember Kimi Raikkonen being real stickler for brakes. He just wanted zero movement in the pedal. He wanted to transmit all of the force, the power from his leg through the brake pedals, and be able to jump on it as hard as he could, and it'd be able to cope with that. I mean, I remember driving in the McLaren simulator. I was lucky enough to get in the McLaren simulator a few times, and the very first time I ever got in it, of course the acceleration is staggeringly fast, but I remember getting to the end of a long straight at the Malaysian Grand Prix, jumping on the brakes when you think you need to stop, having allowed an extra few metres because it's a Formula 1 car, and it just stops, and I had to embarrassingly get back on the throttle and drive to the corner.
I can imagine that. I mean, the braking in Formula 1 always astounds me as to how late they can brake at such ridiculous speeds going down the straight. It is remarkable, but it has to be done well. Of course, left foot braking is the aspect in Formula 1 very much so. Hamilton's just gone third fastest. Oscar Piastri still quickest by a fraction from George Russell. Lewis Hamilton third. Pierre Gasly still showing good pace. Let's see what Lando Norris does as he comes over the line. He goes second. So now we're back to sort of where we've been a bit more seeing a bit more often, a 1-2 for McLaren, but we are seeing Sauber still doing this pretty good job. They're 8th and 9th at this point.
Yeah, the times are going to continue to sort of tumble and move around, as you said, as people start focusing on different things. But all the work really happening on this C6 soft tyre, because that's such an unknown. Alex Albon in the Williams now set the fastest first sector of anybody. So what's interesting about this is they need to know how long this tyre lasts. That's going to be useful information for the rest of the weekend. They need to know how hard they can push over a lap to make sure they've still got performance left at the end. And they also need to know how it's going to affect different cars, because actually some cars work better on the softer end of the range of tyres than others. Others work better at the harder end of the range.
I also think that the fact that everyone's using the soft so much in this session would rather suggest that they're thinking they're not going to be wanting to use it for the race, because they tend to keep tyres back for the race, and they have many more sets of the softest tyre available to them for the weekend out of their allocation that's given to them by Formula 1. So I think this indicates where the teams are already leaning in their strategy, and as I said earlier, they'll be wanting to do a one-stop if they can. And obviously you can only do a one-stop on the medium and the hard tyres.
There's no doubt that we're into two events this weekend and next weekend, Mark, where qualifying could be absolutely crucial. You can overtake at this Imola circuit. Monaco, the next one, virtually impossible. But overtaking here at Imola is not easy unless maybe late in the race one car's tyres are still strong and the others are weak.
Yeah, exactly right. It's not quite Monaco, but it is really tricky. And as you said, that's one of the reasons people will want to favour a one-stop race, so you don't end up dropping back in the pack if you make an extra stop. That's going to be important. So qualifying is going to be really key. And look, if we think about the bigger picture of the championship, it's on race day when McLaren have had the biggest advantage. As Andrew said earlier on, there have been other drivers and other cars, both Mercedes but also Max Verstappen, when it comes to qualifying, who have been able to get very, very close to McLaren. If McLaren can't nail Saturday, if they can't get qualifying right, and I'm particularly thinking of Lando Norris, who's struggled more than Oscar Piastri in that regard, they might find it very difficult to get back to what we now consider to be their normal position running out in front. So it's going to be very interesting, I think. The one-stop element of this, the one risk that I hope we don't see play out, is that teams are so desperate to remain on a one-stop strategy, we see the pace being managed to such an extent, it actually becomes a very slow and quite dull race.
It's quite fun to see the top four at the moment, Andrew, within a tenth of a second, not 1 second, I'm saying a tenth of a second.
Yeah, it's been one of the features of this year that the margins are so small at the top on one single lap. I won't dwell on this point because we're not in Monaco. Monaco's next weekend, but one thing that did strike me yesterday after the driver interviews, actually, I think it was Lando Norris, people were talking about overtaking and whether the pole position is really important here in Imola and at Monaco next weekend. And Norris was saying, actually, with the fact that there's now a mandatory two-stop in Monaco, that he doesn't think pole's going to be as critical as it used to be. Because last year, if you remember, Leclerc put it on pole in the Ferrari. There was a red flag on the first lap. Everyone changed to the hard tyres, and basically the race just was a non-stop from then on, and the positions didn't change for the entire race. But with this mandatory two-stop, which they're doing to try and introduce some place changes in Monaco, and I think probably as an overreaction to that race last year, if you want my opinion. Not that I like to express my opinion too much, but he thinks that actually positions will change in Monaco as a result. He was saying basically you will be able to get back to where your rightful position is going to be because of that two-stop mandatory. It's going to be really interesting to see how that works out, actually.
It will be interesting to see how it works out as a new experiment implying that you've got to have two stops in Monaco. And of course, one of the things, Mark, that will be key to that, and is always important here as well, is the speed in the pit lane that the crew puts together to change the tyres, because it can be such a big part of gaining or losing places.
Absolutely, yeah, under huge pressure, of course, as well, particularly when you're in places like Monaco, when it matters so much. The pressure on those 20 or so people in each pit stop crew is enormous. We've seen Red Bull, in fact, in that regard, someone who've been really kind of class leading over the last few years in pit stops, have some major errors and hiccups, let's say, over the course of this season. Some personnel changes, some technology changes as well.
is so dangerous when you have Bale goes too slow. Hamilton.
Yeah, copy that, Nico.
Nico Hülkenberg there, who came very quickly up against the back of Lewis Hamilton, had to back out to avoid an incident. So that's going to be a feature as well, particularly in qualifying, people trying to manage the gaps as Franco Colapinto runs wide, bounces over the curves and just dips the outside two wheels into the gravel, but lives to fight another day. But yes, pit stops, super important. Interesting, I think, one to keep an eye on is Red Bull, that they just iron out some of those issues, because it's cost Max Verstappen reasonably dearly over the last couple of rounds at times.
Yeah, good point. Hamilton's on a lap now. He was running right over the edge as well, but he's just gone going quite well at the moment, although Leclerc as well we're watching. So Leclerc and Hamilton both on laps. Leclerc's middle sector actually not so good though. Hamilton's fastest in the first sector. Hamilton currently fourth, fastest, remember, within a tenth of... Oh, he's backed off. Oh, that's a shame. Okay, so Lewis Hamilton, we're just riding on board with him right now, and he's back right off despite having had the fastest first sector. Whether he's going to be able to pick up the pace and get a clear run for another run, we'll have to wait and see. He's taking it very steady now. And that is, as we've just seen, that can be an issue around this track. If you're going quite steady and somebody else is going quick, you can get caught out, especially on the uphill sections where it's hard to see where the other car is. Yeah,
and that's going to be interesting for a couple of reasons. We don't know. I didn't see if Lewis made a mistake, which is the reason he backed out, or whether he ran up against traffic. But it'll be interesting learning for the team is that he's pushed for half a lap. He's now going to take the second half of the lap to back things off. Is that tyre going to be able to recover and have enough life left in it to maybe go again on the immediate following lap? Because when it comes to qualifying, that could well be a feature. That could be something that happens.
Esteban Ocon's on track at the moment. He's the slowest of all at this stage, down in 20th place. It's only a 1.2 second gap between first and 20th at this point. We'll just see if that changes, because he's coming over the line with a slightly better first sector, but actually in the end it's a slightly improvement, tiny improvement, but he's still down in 20th place. Isaac Hadjar is just ahead of him. Colapinto's down in 18th place now, but there's still plenty of time to go, of course. Gasly, though, his teammate in the other Alpine, is doing well. He's up in 5th position. He's on an outlap again. Once again, we're seeing the Williams showing decent pace, but for Ferrari, it's sort of a bit up and down all the way through this session. Hamilton currently 4th. Leclerc currently down in 12th position, half a second off the fastest, but that puts him outside the top 10. Antonelli's outside the top 10, but Russell 3rd fastest. So we're seeing a bit of a gap, but as we said, the teams are experimenting with new technology on the cars. They will be running slightly different aspects on the cars as well, and as we heard from George Russell earlier, talking about what it was like watching his teammate, that information coming to the team is so important when they're experimenting with new aspects, particularly on the aero side. We're riding with Alex Albon, listening in here. Oh my goodness, that was a big correction. Exit of one of the chicanes, ran wide into the gravel, sorted it, but nearly could have gone off and hit the wall.
Yeah, it's a circuit that bites, this one. I said earlier on, it's old school, and it is. It's got gravel traps and grass all the way around the edge, and then walls. And if you get it wrong, because some of these corners are taken at very high speed, you can find yourself a victim very, very quickly. But he managed to recover that one and keep it going as Leclerc once again steps into the outside gravel trap after the chicane. He's done that 3 or 4 times. He was, I have to say, right behind an Alpine, so maybe traffic had an impact there, but he's done that 3 or 4 times in this session alone, just trying to find the limits. He's pushing as hard as he can, of course, and that, from a team's perspective, is exactly what you want. You want your driver to push to the limits, maybe step over them so that you know exactly how far you can go, so when it comes to the competitive sessions later on, you've got your limits in your mind, and hopefully you deliver under the pressure.
And it is that outer chicane that, and that was over the curb as well. Yeah, for the Williams, that was a little bit scary moment. But yeah, I was just looking back at Charles Leclerc going through that outer. So last year he went off track at Alta. He did finish in 3rd place, and it was when he spun at Alta in 2022 and lost out. He did finish in 6th place. He had to fight his way back, but he lost quite a lot of places. Thankfully, he didn't actually damage the car too much. But the Alta chicane, which is the last chicane before they get into the last two left-handers. It is the one for Charles Leclerc that seems to...
Not his favourite corner.
No, give him a bit of a challenge, there's no doubt. Carlos Sainz has just done the fastest final sector to go third overall. Well done to Williams. We've got a McLaren 1-2 at this stage with 12 minutes of free practice 1 at Imola to go. And right now, we will see how this is going to develop, because Piastri and Norris first and second, Sainz in third, Russell is currently fourth, Hamilton in fifth, then Gasly in sixth. Surprisingly, a very good effort. We're looking at a replay of Lewis Hamilton, also through the outer chicane, taking it quite easy. Was he in someone's way here? Taking it easy, nice little No, that wasn't a big deal, was it? Oh, yeah, okay. Somebody felt he got in the way.
I just break this.
That was one of the Racing Bulls. I'm not sure which one it was.
I suspect Lewis backed off to allow the Racing Bulls to overtake him, and then the Racing Bull had to then back off to allow someone else to overtake him, and it looked like he dived back in front of Lewis and then hit the brakes. I think he just backed off to allow another car to go through, but it did look a little bit like an aggressive manoeuvre on a motorway where someone angrily cuts you up and then stamps on the brakes just to make a point.
Hamilton a fraction faster than Piastri in the slow corners, interestingly, the slow speed corners. So Hamilton is currently fifth, still within as I said, a tenth of Oscar Piastri. So 5 cars now within a tenth of a second. That's amazing, isn't it? Piastri, Norris, Sainz is part of that now. Russell, Hamilton, a tenth of a second separating 5 cars. At the moment, when you go down to 10th position, Nico Hülkenberg, the gap is 0.4 of a second. So if it's getting into Q3, when we get into qualifying tomorrow, it's going to be so close that the times, the differences will be absolutely minuscule.
It's staggering, isn't it? When you think about what that really means, it's less than a tenth of a second between all of those different teams and drivers. They've gone off to their own factories all around the world, designed and built these cars from scratch, literally inside the 4 walls of their factory, then brought them to a racetrack somewhere else in the world, put them on that circuit, and the hands of each of their drivers are delivering over 4.9 kilometres around this Imola circuit. Less than a tenth of a second difference. It's unbelievably close, isn't it? I think a real testament to the end of this sort of stable set of regulations, where everyone's now figured out just how much they can get out of this rule cycle, and performance is converging, which should make great racing.
Yeah, I can't rely on the rear. Still second, drifting everywhere.
Max Verstappen just reporting to the team how he's feeling with the car right now, as of course that kind of information very important as they try and understand exactly what's going on. Piastri's best lap, middle sector and the final sector, although Max Verstappen has had the fastest first sector, but he is down in 7th place at the moment, Max Verstappen, and to only 0.3 of a second off the actual pace. Albon a fraction behind him, Bortoletto and Hülkenberg in that top 10. Outside the top 10 we've got Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc down in 12th, Antonelli 13th, Alonso in 14th, Liam Lawson in 15th place. Yuki Tsunoda is down in 16th, so he's been up and down quite a lot, but yeah, Tsunoda now, he has been frustrated. I've seen him angry a couple of times with cars getting in his way, Tsunoda. He is down in 16th, Colapinto 17th, Ollie Behrman 18th, Isaac Hadjar down in 19th place. Let's see whether Hadjar, because Hadjar actually hasn't failed to get out of Q1 in any of the sessions so far this year, but we'll see how that works tomorrow. And Esteban Ocon is still the slowest at the moment, but just 1.1 seconds off the ultimate pace.
Yeah, I think Hadjar's had a reasonably solid start to his season and to his Formula 1 career. I think he's had occasions when he's really shone, but even the ones when he hasn't, he's certainly not embarrassed himself. He had a very difficult start, of course, in Australia. That moment on the way to the grid where he ended up in the wall, and heartbreaking scenes as he walks his way back. But he's recovered really quite well from that. The resilience he's shown has been fantastic, and I think he's on a decent path. Just to put quickly what Max Verstappen said on the radio there into some context, where he's talking about can't sort of handle the rear end of the car. He said it's drifting all over the place. To give you some context on that, he's talking about the back end stepping out, not gripping as he turns into a corner, but by the kind of margins that you and I wouldn't even notice. I mean, it's not like a car is going round on opposite lock, drifting around the circuit. We're talking about it stepping out by the tiniest fractions, and when he wants to get on the power, the wheels are spinning up, he can't get the grip down on the circuit. That's what you need to drive yourself forward. So it's tiny little differences on all of these cars with all these drivers, but that's of course what they're looking for throughout these practice sessions.
But you're right. I mean, he has that ability to understand what's not quite working for him. And that is all part and parcel of his success with the Red Bull team. It's getting that information to your team as quickly as possible so they can then work on it. And having that driver experience where he can drive such a rapid lap, but there's a part of his mind that always knows, OK, that's where this is working, that's where it's not working.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just the people back in the garage that, of course, are taking on board that information. They're comparing it to the data that they have. There's a whole other team back at base, back in Milton Keynes in the UK, who are also doing exactly that same thing at the same time. So hundreds of people analysing both the feedback from the driver and the data that they're seeing to try and make sometimes the tiniest little tweaks and changes to the systems or the setup on the car, just to try and dial out that tiny little amount of oversteer or drifting that Max Verstappen's reporting.
Absolutely. You're listening in to Ollie Behrman now in the Haas as he makes his way around. He's set on a set of the medium compound tyres, down in 18th place at the moment. And Ollie Behrman, who has scored some points this year, best finished 8th. He's actually scored on 3 occasions so far this year. Unlucky last time out in Miami in the main race. Had a non-finish. There was an engine technical problem that sadly put Ollie Behrman out of that race, and he wasn't able to score in the sprint race in Miami either. Didn't score in Saudi, but he did score in Bahrain. Finished in 10th place in Bahrain and in Japan. So some useful points then. Still riding on board with him. Does look to me as though many of the cars have got a bit more fuel on board now. They're looking to do a little bit more race setup here.
Yeah, exactly. As I said earlier on, they have a different run plan, so it's not all about always just going out to set the fastest lap time. And we of course look at the timing sheets because it's pretty much the only data we have available to us. But the teams are looking at how the car's handling in those different conditions. What's the degradation like on a set of tyres? If you're doing a longer run full of fuel, almost more representative of a race situation, how does the tyre performance drop away? How does the lap time start to fall away? How does the car handle? You know, what sort of reporting does the driver bring back in those different kind of scenarios? So it's all really valuable, really important. Doesn't always set the timing sheets alight, but nonetheless it matters. It matters for later in the weekend.
That was interesting. Max, as we were just looking at a replay, he was obviously about to go on an outlap and he really floored it coming out of the last corner, and he got quite a big slide, but just about held it.
I just said he wasn't drifting around the track. He was then. That was a handful of opposite lock coming out of that final chicane. So yeah, a frustrated Max Verstappen inside the cockpit of that Red Bull.
Yeah, he was frustrated. We could see him banging his hand against the wheel and then nodding his head. We didn't hear what that was all about quite, but he was frustrated, there's no doubt about it. We shall see how it goes. Hannah Schmidt's the strategy engineer, keeping an eye on all of this. At this stage, though, it's more about how the car is being set up, how they can make it work. Nice to see Peter Sauber here, the man who, of course, set up the original Sauber team, the team that will become fully Audi next year, but it is already backed, of course, to a large extent by Audi. But it's lovely to see Peter Sauber, who was such a key part of Formula One for so many years, here at Imola this weekend. He's keeping an eye on the two cars. They're doing quite well at this stage, and we're watching Gabriele Bortoleto right now in one of the two Saubers. They are 9th and 10th. He's currently 9th. Again, the times are slower now. There's definitely more of a race pace going on here because he's just gone over the line doing a 1:19 kind of time, just to show us what they will be doing in the race. A very different kind of pace in qualifying, of course. But this is quite encouraging to see the Saubers showing a bit more pace.
Yeah, not a bad start to the weekend for them. I think when you think about Audi coming in next season, major manufacturer joining this sport with a full operation. This isn't just becoming a power unit supplier. This is taking over a team. The problem they've got is they've taken over what's pretty much been one of the slowest teams on the grid for some time, and that's going to be their biggest challenge. Yes, they'll put huge investment in. They're going to make a number of changes, bring personnel in, which they're already doing, but they've still got a giant leap to take. The reason they're coming in, or at least a big part of the reason they're coming in, is there's such a big opportunity next year with all of these regulations changing, as we touched on earlier on. It's almost going to be a bit of a leveller in terms of the playing field, in that everything changes so dramatically that it provides opportunity for everybody. So can Audi come in and just get those regulations nailed? Can they get it right where others don't and find their way up the grid? Because at the moment they've bought a team that's pretty much towards the back, albeit with a good start today.
Absolutely. Just a couple of minutes to go in the first practice session. We've got a yellow flag. And the Sauber's gone off, and that is unfortunate. That's Bortoletto, I think, isn't it? That's gone off, and he's damaged the front wing, has made contact against the barrier. He is okay. He's just reporting back to the team. That's a shame, because we've got a red flag now, so effectively this session has come to an early halt, I think. I rather doubt they're going to set it off again. And Bortoletto, who've done a good job there, unfortunately has now been the only one of this session so far to make any contact.
Well, I was almost just thinking we haven't had much of an intervention with yellow flags or red flags all session long, and there he goes. So we'll get a replay and talk you through it in a moment, but it looks like he's hit a barrier nose in, damaged the front wing. Beyond that, hopefully not too serious. He's okay and is about to start climbing out the car. So the replay coming up for us now. So he comes down the hill, jumps on the brakes, gets it turned into the left, over the outside curve nicely, and almost it was a massive snap of oversteer in the mid part of the corner. So he either went in a little bit too quickly in the car, the grip just wasn't there to handle the pace, or he stepped on the throttle a little bit too early, sailed off across the gravel. And it won't be too serious from a team perspective. Nose in, he's just damaged the front wing, and here he is.
I crashed.
Okay, mate. Are you okay, mate?
Yeah, I'm okay. Okay, I think it was just the front wing.
Yeah, so he's damaged the front wing, definitely. It was through the double left-hander Rivazza. It was the second part that just went wrong for him, and he's slammed in. But as you say, when we look at the damage on a car, when it's basically taking it front on pretty much 90 degrees, that's the best way to do it in a way.
Yeah, and as you said, with the clock ticking down now, there's only 45 seconds left. The clock doesn't stop in a practice session with a red flag, so that will be it. He hasn't missed out in terms of too much running. Nobody has. They'll probably all still be able to come round and do their practice starts at the end of the session, but that will draw this first practice session to a close. And it's been an interesting one, and lots of learning happened up and down the grid, as we said.
Indeed, but guess what? Championship leader Oscar Piastri has set the pace in the first free practice session here at Imola, and it is a McLaren 1-2. So well done to Oscar Piastri. We are just looking at the background of a quick lap from him, but let me run you through that order. It's Piastri from Norris, Carlos Sainz impressively third fastest for Williams, George Russell fourth in the Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton fifth for Ferrari, Pierre Gasly in the Alpine in sixth place, Max Verstappen, big challenger, he was seventh quickest, Alex Albon in eighth, Gabriel Bortoletto had that instant right at the end, but he had set the ninth fastest time, Nico Hülkenberg, his teammate, was 10th, Lance Stroll for Aston Martin in 11th place, ahead of Charles Leclerc for Ferrari in 12th, Kimi Antonelli was 13th for Mercedes, Fernando Alonso in his Aston Martin was 14th, Liam Lawson for Racing Bulls in 15th, ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in the other Red Bull car, then 17th Franco Colapinto making his return to Formula 1 this weekend in the Alpine, Ollie Behrman was 18th for Haas, Isaac Hadjar only 19th in the Racing Bulls, and 20th was Esteban Ocon. That's how the top 20 looked out in the whole show so far. And Mark, of course, no great surprise that McLaren were fastest, but still some interesting ups and downs there. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. Sauber was one of the surprising ones for me, although I'm not necessarily guaranteeing that they'll be in the top 10 when it comes to qualifying.
No, that's right. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. I guess if you're looking for interest in the timing sheet, perhaps it's that there are some big disparities between teammates. It looks like Hamilton at this point in the weekend seemingly the happier of the two Ferrari drivers. Leclerc all the way down in 12th with Hamilton in 5th. George Russell a little bit happier than Kimi Antonelli, the home hero, or we hope he will be, and Carlos Sainz quicker than his teammate Alex Albon as well. So a little bit of work to do on some sides of certain garages, but that's exactly what these practice sessions are for. They've now got some time where they can start pulling these cars apart, having a good look at data, talking to the drivers, and then putting in place any changes they feel might help them when it comes to practice 2 later on.
Absolutely, and very close times, as we mentioned. That that little group up front within a tenth of a second of each other, from Oscar Piastri, the leader, to Lewis Hamilton in 5th place. But if you say, well, what did half a second get you from the top? Well, it took you down to 12th place because Charles Leclerc was half a second off the ultimate pace, but that's put him down in 12th position. Lando Norris is out of his car now, just having a look at some of the data, and he's not looking particularly happy yet, but he was only a fraction off Oscar Piastri. It's the early stages of the race weekend, of course, and it does matter to him. There is a little smile coming up. And Kimi Antonelli, the Italian who is now racing effectively at a home circuit, very much doing a decent job there but just outside the top 10 at the moment, but not a long way off. So he's still going to be playing it. He's got family, friends, all sorts here this weekend. Mercedes very much backing him up. But Carlos Sainz was impressive, 3rd fastest in the Williams, and I think he'll be delighted with that. That was a good show by Williams, with Alex Albon also well in the top 10 in 8th position. So that's how we've seen the first practice go here at Imola in Italy. It's been an enjoyable session. We've got a free practice 2 coming up later, but let's go back to the cricket now with Kevin Howells.
Yes, thank you very much. We have no cricket for the time being, but it gives me a chance to talk about all sorts of very interesting things.